Hi, this is Chief Master Sergeant Bill Perkins, and I'm going to discuss my framework with you. And today we're going to cover vertical leadership for the NCO, the non-commissioned officer. So by vertical leadership, can you guess what that means? I'm just going to give you a second to think about it. So if you search the term in various search engines, a variety of things will come up. If you Google this, you're going to see a variety of leadership articles that they'll have different variations of what vertical leadership is. And if you think about it, one of the definitions or applications of the term would be common with what military personnel think of vertical development, corresponding with that vertical movement up the chain of command. You know, how we put rank on and we move vertically. However, in the context of this framework, vertical development deals with our leadership habits, mindsets, and capacities, not vertical movement up and down the chain of command or corresponding with how many stripes are on our sleeve. Now, think about our leadership competencies, skills, and knowledge that we experience from a variety of developmental opportunities, including professional development, kind of like what you're receiving right now. And think about the enlisted professional military education, your EPME. They kind of move horizontal, right? So you receive all the theory-based frameworks for effective management, such as change management, conflict resolution, ethical decision-making, and a variety of leadership approaches, right? Transformational, situational leadership, the different facets of transactional leadership. They move horizontally because you're essentially just adding more tools to your toolbox. The depth of leadership you walk away with is up to you, right? For the purpose of this leadership lesson, horizontal leadership will refer to the knowledge, skills, and competencies, and vertical leadership will refer to your habits, mindsets, and capacities. So think about your competencies, right? Your capacity within each competency is how well you're applying, right? That's the depth. Okay, so we're going to move on now that you know that. So let's look at the first quote. The problem isn't that they, being leaders, don't know. The problem is they can't do. They don't need to learn, they need to grow. In this first quote, Nick Petrie, one of the leading researchers in vertical leadership at the Center for Creative Leadership, makes a very accurate assessment. So back to our EPME, right? Think about our EPME and professional development opportunities. We are taught the basic models. Now, for organizational change, if you remember going back to your EPME, you're taught the Lewin model of change being unfreezing, implementing change, and then refreezing, right? And then for conflict resolution, you're taught the Thomas model. And that is, the competing value model and participative conflict management of competing, collaborating, accommodating, avoiding, and compromising. And in respect to our ethical decision-making model, we are taught the Toner model of owing, ordering, and auditing, right? So each framework comes with specific steps, if you remember. However, we never really address the mindsets or the desired capacities to carry out those steps. We really don't discuss how certain occurrences can affect our mindset while implementing measures associated with those theory-based models. Now, when dealing with organizational change, one may miss a barrier to change because of his or her mindset. Or while engaged in conflict resolution, one may miss the constructive principles present in the conflict, only framing it in a negative context, right? Because it's conflict. But as we've learned from Dr. Thomas, conflict can also be constructive, right? So we're going to cover these mindsets momentarily. I want to start you thinking about how your development thus far has fostered only horizontal movement by adding competencies but it has been up to you to increase your own capacity within each competency. Now, let's look at the next quote. Without the understanding of adult development and how it is facilitated or constrained, leadership developers and educators will keep the ongoing traditional approaches as leadership learning or leadership training instead of fostering actual growth. And that's from Robert Keegan and Lisa Leahy, leading theorists in adult development. And, this quote just reinforces what I just explained. Many times we have mistaken adding tools to our toolbox as actual growth or development, which is why we look for examples when we ask you those tools in promotion board questions, right? We ask you questions based on these horizontal leadership tools that you've essentially added to your toolbox. And essentially, your answer will illustrate the magnitude or the depth, rather, of your understanding of the implementation of each tool, right? So that's where the horizontal and the vertical leadership meet. That's the axis. And this final quote, looking at the impact of vertical development has on a leader's ability to navigate through the forces of today's organizational challenges, leaves people little doubt that vertical leadership development is the largest determinant of future success, and if ignored, can be the largest obstacle to growth. And in this final quote, Dr. Alan Watkins hit the nail on the head when he assessed that failing to focus on vertical development will impede growth. Now, trying to get the Air Force to change its strategies on professional development is quite an undertaking, and I certainly don't have that kind of clout. However, when you what you will learn from this lesson is vertical development is a personal undertaking, and you can take these horizontal leadership topics of organizational change, conflict resolution, and ethical decision making, and increase your own capacities in each of those facets of leadership. So it's been an age-old question of whether leadership is an art or a science, and any one of us could argue it is one, the other, or even both. I'm going to reframe the context of how leadership is an art in regards to the artful measures you take as a leader, and ask you, what do you see here in this image? What do you see here in this picture or print? I'm going to give you a few seconds to digest this. Now, it appears as though this man down there in the lower left is moving through spectrums or worlds of some sort. Notice the spectrum or world that he's traveling from isn't really subdued or old or ugly. Seems to be no true reason why he wants to move out of that context or world, environmental context, I should say. And also, if you look close enough, there appears to be additional layers. Like once he makes it past this one, you see the fringe from the next layer, and then there's another layer and another layer. Now, when talking about vertical leadership, we're talking about mindsets. We're talking about capacities. What shapes our thinking, speaking, and behavior. And these all come in stages. They're like layers. And you go through different stages of adult development. These mindsets, layers, stages, as you will soon learn, are referred to as action logics. So what we do as airmen, especially in a leadership or management capacity, is shaped by these action logics or these layers. And this illustration and corresponding quote provides a solid explanation of what action logic is. So we're looking at the quote, and the developmental psychologists have identified that what differentiates leaders is not their management style, it is their internal action logic, which is how they interpret their surroundings and react when their power or safety is challenged. I know that's a lot to digest, but think about when faced with any occurrence, and that occurrence could be an incident, a decision we have to make, or anything else that would prompt any action. We consciously, and sometimes subconsciously, engage in meaning making. Okay, we're trying to digest what happened, what's happening in front of us, what the occurrences, what did we just read? We're engaging in some type of interpretation of our surroundings. And this meaning making is shaped by our stage of adult development or action logic within that snapshot of time. Now, our action logic then shapes our behavior. Then you can see where you have the input into this machine, this meaning making being our brain. And so we're faced with the occurrence. We engage in the meaning making, and then our output, as you'll see in the upper right hand corner of this machine, which is our brain, spits out our mindset, what we say, our actions. They're all shaped by our interpretation of our surroundings. Our action logic shapes our behavior, whether it is the mindset we're in, what we're saying, or our actions. Although there are quite a few leading theorists in the field of action logics and adult development, you have Susan Cook-Gruder, you have Robert Keegan, who you'll see where I quote him throughout this lesson. Jennifer Garvey Berger, you have Bill Joyner. So you have an array of theorists out there that engage in adult development or action logic growth. Now, the framework I follow is that of Bill Torber, and it's because he has focused his research on how these action logics affect leaders in their decision-making efforts. So it's essentially, and David Rook too, Bill Torber and David Rook have collaborated, worked together, what have you. It's the fact that they've applied stages of adult developmental psychology in the field of leadership, and that's why I choose the framework of Torber and Rook. Now, Torber, along with Rook, have identified 7 action logics that they have referred to in books and research pieces as the 7 transformations of leadership. So we're going to go over these. We're going to start from the bottom, being the earlier stages, and work our way up to the top. Now, the layout here of bottom to top is not meant to illustrate that there's a hierarchy in these stages of development. It's just that there's a flow. Okay, so it's not meant to demean or to say that one action logic is superior to the other, although when it comes down to making leadership decisions, as you will see, it tends to be the case, but it's not based on intelligence. We're not talking about a hierarchical structure here. Okay, so we're going to start with the opportunist, and these action logics are also categorized as the pre-conventional mindset or action logic to the conventional mindset or action logic, and then the post-conventional action or action logic or mindset. So the opportunist is your wins for self in any way possible, right? And this is your pre-conventional action logic. Then the next stage is your diplomat. And your diplomat wants to belong and fit in. And you're going to see as I'm going over these, there's going to be times where you've exhibited certain behaviors that are associated with each action logic. And we're going to dive into this much more deep as we move on. And you're going to see where you've exhibited behaviors with just about all these. The alchemical, being the alchemist, as we get into that action logic, you're going to see that there's a very, very small portion of the population of leaders that would profile alchemical. You probably won't see many times where you've exhibited the behaviors, but you could have. So your opportunist, back to your opportunist. Your opportunist is the pre-conventional. Moving up to the diplomat, they want to belong to fit in. That's the first of your conventional action logics. That's your conventional mindset. Next is your expert, who focuses on logic and expertise. Now, with the expert and the achiever, which is next, that is the last of the conventional mindsets, which is driven by personal and team achievement. You're going to see that the expert, who again focuses on logic and expertise, and the achiever, who is driven by personal and team achievement, you're going to be like, wow, I think I know a lot of people like this. And that's just because they happen to be the highest population of profiled leaders in the corporate world. But, with us being military, it's because our mechanistic culture, military culture, tends to foster that expert mindset and achiever mindset, which we'll get into later of why. Then the next one you have is the redefining. And this is where you become an individualist. This is the person who reframes complex problems in unique ways. Okay, so you're kind of spanning away. You're spanning those boundaries away from our mechanistic culture, and you're starting to become an individual here. You're starting to foster maybe innovation when innovation's not really being fostered by the culture. You're cultivating new ways of doing things, although maybe the guidance says you're going to do something else, But back to when you were an achiever, you were referencing the guidance, on everything. The guidance was your Bible. If the guidance said something different, it wasn't true. It was like that when you were an expert too. The achiever is when, you get your CCAF, and then you're like, I filled in one square, and I want to get another, and I want to start getting those superior performer awards, and I want some best practices, So we're highly driven, but if you think about our culture, we laud that behavior. We're constantly recognizing that behavior to a degree where it really cultivates it, So, those are the two that you're really going to relate to, being military. After that redefining, you're staying in the post-conventionals, and now you're transforming, as you see second from the top. And now you're generating organizational and personal transformations. This is your optimal. This is what we should all strive to be, transforming. This is where you're really hitting that strategist action logic. And then, like I said, the alchemical integrates material, spiritual, and societal transformations. Yeah, these are your Nelson Mandela's, your Gandhis, constantly out of the box, rarely in the box. So you probably would have a little bit of friction with the organizational culture with an alchemist. But this is just a quick introduction, and we're going to dive into these a lot more in the next slide. Now, I want you to look at this slide, and I want you to digest it a bit. Can anyone guess or tell me what these are? I'm going to give you some time. Look at them. Now, if you guessed, or if you knew the answer being that they are the general Nco responsibilities in accordance with the Air Force Handbook 36-2618. Remember, it's a handbook now, not an instruction. You're absolutely right. So now I'm going to take the action logics and frame and illustrate how they shape our behavior in correlation with these responsibilities. Okay, so this is the axis where the horizontal and the vertical leadership meet. Okay, so I want you to pay close attention, because you may be surprised at times when you were in the mindset of an earlier stage of development, where maybe you think you're prominent action logic, because we all have a prominent one, maybe of a later stage, there are times where, whether it's driven from an occurrence or we deliberately transform to an earlier stage of development, to deal with the forces that present themselves, whether it's engaged in conflict, whether it is to negotiate, whether it is to maybe transform yourself to the expert stage because you're going to reference guidance. So, there are times where you're going to, you probably exhibited a lot of the behaviors that are associated with all the action logics. Identifying what your prominent one is the tricky thing, and we'll get into that later. So, but I just wanted you to be aware of these are your general NCO responsibilities, and I want to show you a way of integrating this vertical leadership into your responsibilities. So, these are the common behaviors that are associated with the opportunist. And I want you to feel free to take a slide, a little shot of this slide. You can take a picture, you can do a screenshot, you can take some notes down, but you're going to definitely want to know the behaviors that are associated with the opportunist. Now, if you look over there in the right-hand corner, you're going to notice again, like I said, the opportunist is your pre-conventional action logic, and only 5% of the leaders, and I believe this is more of a corporate America study administered by Torvald and Associates, have identified that only 5% of the leaders would profile an opportunist. So the opportunist is extremely competitive and manipulative. We all know people like this, and there's times we've been the opportunist. And they will tactfully manipulate and deceive others to achieve his or her ends. They tend to view situations and people as opportunities to be exploited. They may drop the person as soon as the benefit in exchange proves unprofitable in the short run. They treat what he or she can get away with as permissible and legitimate, and they view unilateral or autocratic power as the only effective type of power. They try to win by any means possible, and they view timely action as occurring when I win. And they focus on concrete tasks as opposed to ideas, plans, or principles. And they work within very short time focus of a few hours to a few days, and is not very concerned with the long-term effects of his or her actions. And they react to feedback as an attack. And I know we've seen this as leaders. And they usually go on the offensive against the person offering the feedback. And they consistently blame outside of him or herself, and they do not accept responsibility for errors and misjudgment, and externalize blame. And they tend to be good in short-term emergency situations, as he or she can cut to the chase and initiate action. So a lot of times too, the opportunist is effective when you need somebody to take quick action, strike while the iron's hot. They usually know when the iron's hot, and they will also be good in sales or negotiations. So this is your opportunist. Now, these are, we're going to go over some of the NCO responsibilities that I covered earlier, and we're going to look at how the opportunist can be damaging to an organizational or strategic initiatives. And you will also see that the opportunist mindset will foster the working in silos approach and not seeing the big picture when framing decisions. Now, some of the decisions may be so narrow in nature that they only focus on the shop and not the impact to the flight, the squadron, or even the group, especially the organization as a whole. So you'll see that a lot of times, the decisions of the opportunists will somewhat benefit themselves or, a small group of people. But it definitely won't have a world view. It won't have an organizational view. Now, this doesn't mean that someone who would profile as an opportunist needs to be removed from the organization. You certainly don't want to do that. There are times, like I said earlier, when where you need an opportunist. They just require more management because of the heightened concern for the ethical infractions. So they just come with a little bit more management, but you will definitely find things to do with your opportunists, like ways that you can engage them. Okay, so we're going to go over these responsibilities. So the first one, lead and develop subordinates and exercise effective followership in mission accomplishment. And let's see here. Don't worry about what the AFI says. Just pencil whip the checklist, and we'll say we did it. Now, we've all heard somebody say that. Maybe not. I hope you haven't. But it's not that uncommon. There may have been times where we all can recall that inspection, that up-and-coming inspection, where we found it, we thought it would be a good idea. But think about that. The ramifications, it goes against our core value system. It's an actual infraction in accordance with the 2618 and our core values, like I said. But we may have heard somebody say this. Okay, so that's definitely the opportunist mindset. Now we're going to go down to this, and these are just randomly selected, these responsibilities. Increase knowledge and understanding of and mentor junior enlisted airmen on the institutional and occupational competencies required to accomplish the mission. And with that, we all have heard this one before. Who cares about that shop? At least our section will pass that capstone. The capstone being, the Air Combat Command Inspector General comes, administers their big inspection on us inspecting ourselves. Are we being truthful in our MCT and our iGEMs? But when it becomes that dog eat dog, and we're worried about ourselves, and maybe our actions have an impact on another section or a shop, and we turn it into a selfish win, that's your opportunist. Okay, these are just ways to frame and illustrate those behaviors that are associated with that action logic, and I think this is a very effective way of doing it. Next, demonstrate and facilitate a climate of effective followership by willingly owning, explaining, and promoting leaders' decisions. Well, this feedback is a personal attack. I know my performance is subpar, but Staff Sergeant Smith doesn't show up on time. Does he get a bad EPR? I show up on time. So there's numerous things wrong here, but definitely your opportunists. They're trying to deflect, and maybe poor Staff Sergeant Smith hasn't been in trouble yet, but now chances are people are going to start looking at them, which they should probably if they're late all the time. Nonetheless, this is your deflecting behavior. This is very common in the opportunists. They took their feedback on the EPR as a personal attack instead of just owning it, maybe having a little bit of humility and saying, you know what, you're right, and you know what, and really Staff Sergeant Smith's tardiness has nothing to do with this airman's or NCO's ill performance. So, like I said, they're trying to deflect instead of own. That's a common attribute with the opportunists. Next, if senior in grade accept the responsibility for assuming the role of the leader, and I know I've seen this before in the past, unfortunately. I'm the ranking NCO here, therefore I'll make the schedule. I'll take Saturdays and Sundays off. You can have Tuesdays and Wednesdays off. Since you're a 3 level, and there will be no one here to help you if you need decision-making assistance, you can always try me on my cell. Well, there's numerous things wrong here, and the opportunist is taking an opportunity to assert themselves. Yeah, hopefully you're not seeing this too much on the NCO level. However, there are some NCOs that are on the later end of the tier, the higher end of the tier, your tech sergeants before they become senior NCOs that are empowered to make the schedules and make these kinds of decisions. So here you have somebody asserting their rank, but the real problem here is, number one, they're leaving a shift being staffed with a 3 level, so they're prioritizing their weekend off to leave a void in the schedule and the manpower. So you're going to have a serious, it's going to have serious implications on the mission being accomplished, right? Yeah, this person, like service before self, was definitely not high on this individual's list. And next, we're going to actively lead and supervise subordinates, another general NCO responsibility. And I receive a meets on my performance report, therefore that's what you're getting. And unfortunately, I hear this happens. So that's actually not funny that happens. I don't know why I just laughed, but I guess it's just because I can't believe it happens. So that's your opportunist. They're upset about theirs, so they're just going to pass it along and not give an accurate assessment. So I hope you actually see this and see that there's something wrong with that, and how the opportunist mindset can have ramifications on mission accomplishment. It'll have a huge impact on human motivation and performance. So now let's take a look at our diplomat. So when you think of the Thomas model for conflict resolution, you have to be careful of this person, your diplomats, being accommodating or avoiding during occurrences involving conflict. So if you remember from the theory that you learned in your PMA, conflict that could be more constructive by triggering more discussion or collaboration, it can certainly shut down here with your diplomat. It can shut down quickly too. It can prevent the desired outcome from emerging and remaining what Dr. Thomas refers to as destructive conflict. So again, like the opportunist, although this may not be our prominent action logic, we may find ourselves behaving like a diplomat at times, especially in our environment. Our environmental context that involves rank and position power. There's times where we're just going to nod our head and just go in agreement with everybody else. And it's unfortunate that it happens. However, and this just reinforces why our leaders, and especially top leadership, needs to be of the post-conventional mindset and know those position powers that are at play. And it's going to foster people just nodding their head at you in agreement just because of your rank. So you have to understand there's going to be some people who could challenge you and maybe do a better job at triggering a little bit more thought and inquiry in your decisions. But they have diplomats like here. They're just yes men. Now there's times where that yes man or the diplomat is effective. There's times where you want a diplomat. For example, let's say you need a yes man to get more buy-in for organizational change during turbulent times, and the dissenters only become barriers to change. What other times do you think a diplomat could be useful? Sure, let's look at them. They are aware of group strength over individual power, and they seek to belong to established groups. They conform to teams or group protocols and rules, and they try to do what is expected of him or her. These aren't people who are looking to shake up things. They seek approval from others by following and conforming with the social and group norms. They provide the qualities of reliability, loyalty, and goodwill that help raise or maintain high morale. And they're loyal to his or her immediate team or group rather than to more distant organization or principles, and is good at creating a sense of community, provides the social glue for teams and groups, and works with longer time spans than the Opportunist, usually within 1 week to 3 month time horizon. They avoid or ignore conflict because they don't want to rock the boat. They avoid taking action, which may cause discontent and ruffled feathers. They avoid situations which call for independent action, and they are overly agreeable and unable to criticize or reprimand others and to question group norms, which could be a problem in our environment. They will not voice disagreement to those in more senior positions, even if he or she believes the actions to be unjust, and they are uncomfortable with feedback that is even lightly critical of them. You'll see they're very hard on themselves. He equates negative feedback with loss of face and loss of status, which are the most important things to the diplomat, and usually feel uneasy evaluating and offering feedback to others. That's a problem. That's a problem because here at your NCO level, you're looking to make it to the next level. By this time, if you're a staff sergeant, tech sergeant, hopefully you're in that position where you're empowered to give feedback to others. And they prefer to maintain the status quo. They don't like to initiate change due to conflict that may be involved. Okay, so that's your diplomat. So now we're going to go over some of the NCO responsibilities and look at the diplomat mindset. So here's your diplomat. So here's your responsibility. Lead and develop subordinates and exercise effective followership and mission accomplishment. I really never asked why we do this. Just do it because we were told to do it. Well, this has numerous implications and issues. It's okay to know the why. The old mindset of shut up and color, or why the millennials and the Zers, tech geners, why do they need to know? Why are they asking why and just not following an order? Well, it's because you're motivated by a purpose. And we as good, NCOs and senior NCOs who are leading people, we need to give you the why. And to be effective, it's okay. It's okay to ask why. And you also want to know, especially, we're in a day and age where we're fostering more innovative approaches. We're involved in continuous process improvement. You want to know maybe if there's a better way of doing things, So, you want to introduce that dynamic. I understand you want us to do it this way, sir or ma'am. However, did you ever think maybe we can do it this way, and introduce another way? So just being in that mindset where you don't want to rock the boat and ask a simple question like why, especially maybe you're given an order to do something that, could be a little damaging, and you want to know why. It's okay to ask. Okay, so the next one, if senior in grade, accept responsibility for assuming the role of a leader. What's that? You don't want to follow my orders? Okay, whatever. And this is weak leadership. The diplomat, this is a problem. Because number one, you're dealing with an individual who doesn't want to follow orders. Okay, that needs to be dealt with there, because that is also a NCO general responsibility of yours. But you definitely don't want to shrug your shoulders. Number one, you'll never gain the respect of your people. And two, an individual who's not following orders needs to be dealt with because that type of that can infest a culture. It can totally destroy a culture, especially when you have people who are challenging authority. Remain keenly aware of individual and group dynamics affecting readiness and safety. Okay, so we'll see what the diplomat has to say. I knew that Major was acting inappropriate. However, I didn't want to say anything because of reprisal. Okay, now you may have even been given a question like this on a promotion board in the past, But this heavily corresponds with your moral courage, right? From your 1-1. You can read the Airman's Handbook, and read up on moral courage, and it's the most unpopular thing. And we think about the day and age now where we have a rise in sexual assaults, and also ethical decision making seems to be an issue out there. And a lot of people are like afraid of, they're lacking that moral courage to step up, and they're afraid of reprisal. However, it's a NCO responsibility of yours to step up and exhibit that moral courage. And I thought this was a perfect fit for it. And this is the diplomat's mindset. So provide feedback and counseling to subordinates on performance, career opportunities, promotions, benefits, and entitlements. So you have, I really don't know what you've done to develop airmanship, but I'll just mark clearly exceeds here. This is a huge problem, especially with the pencil-whipped EPRs and ACAs. People are not getting the honest feedback, but the diplomat may not want to give honest feedback because they don't want to engage in any type of conflict. Sometimes it's one of our toughest jobs to give negative feedback. However, somebody will never move from a just meets to a clearly exceeds unless they're being told with clear, measurable, definable standards what they're doing wrong. So you're really doing, in your diplomat mindset, doing a disservice not only to the airmen but the organization too, because that whatever they're doing in ill performance, within their ill performance, where they're not really clearly exceeding the standard, it's just going to continue. It's going to continue because they're being told it's okay. So that's a pretty good example of the diplomat mindset there. And finally, appropriately recognize and reward individuals whose military conduct and duty performance clearly exceeds established standards. Ensure subordinates are held accountable when they do not meet established standards. And this one is, we've all seen this one before. I don't know what is happening between the two of you, and I know I'm the supervisor for both of you, but I'm not getting involved in this. You're supposed to be in quotes there. Yeah, this one here, I mean, you definitely don't want to take a diplomat approach and engage in what the Thomas model calls avoiding conflict. If you have an issue within your workplace, and you have a competing value system, that's emerged, you're going to want to intervene. You're going to want to correct the behavior because right now you're not optimizing human or social capital to get the mission accomplished. Okay, so it's definitely something that, this right here is a clear example of what a diplomat would say. And we've all heard people, I'm not getting in the middle of you two, or I'm not going to address that. That's their problem. The problem is that's going to fester. It's going to hurt the culture. It's going to impede optimization when it comes down to mission accomplishment. So it has to be dealt with. It has to be. So now we're going to move on to the expert. And I said this earlier, and I'm going to reinforce what I said. The expert and achiever, which is, we're going to cover the achiever next, will seem very familiar to many of you. Our military and mechanistic culture provides constraints in which we constantly defer to the guidance when faced with an occurrence, right? We seem to always be going to some kind of a, some kind of performance objective, the guidance, some kind of TO, whatever, a checklist. There always seems to be something that's going to drive the desired behavior, especially at times of complexity. And the expert will do things right, and they will get the job done. However, you will see a lot of occurrences with the confirmation bias when dealing with experts. And that's where they're in a constant state of, making a comment or an insinuation or a decision and then seeking the guidance that's only going to confirm what they just said. Sometimes with bias, like I said, and with such issues as being right all the time, accompanied with that confirmation bias, transformation to the next action logic, being an achiever, may be difficult for the expert because in his or her mind, he or she has optimized performance already, and there is no room for growth. They think that they've reached the top already. And during volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous times, now think about those words: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. They're accompanied with an acronym called VUCA. And VUCA is something that's being heavily studied now. Center for Creative Leadership. You can Google the term. Army War College. I know the Army's leadership is embracing the term. Yeah, VUCA is essentially that complex environment where you're dealing with the volatility, uncertainty, complexities, and ambiguity. So the problem with the expert is the expert has a dependency on what the guidance states. And they're constantly going to go for the guidance. They're constantly going to run and jump on that checklist. And the tendency to do things on his or her own, they're going to take things on their own. They're not really going to look to collaborate because in their mind, they lack trust that other people can be successful with it. So they have to grab the bull by the horns and run with it. And unfortunately, because they'll lack that embrace of diversity and cognitive diversity of collaboration and getting more minds involved, they have a lower degree of success in a complex environment. So their independent thinker mentality will only get so far when the situation calls for more of an interdependent collaborator to tap into the total human capital and get the job done. So I'm going to leave this up a bit. So you see the expert values decisions made almost exclusively on technical merit alone, disregarding context, culture, anecdotes, and other contingencies. Works within a longer time span. You're going to notice as we go through these later stages of adult development that the time horizons that they work within usually increase. So here they work within a longer time span than the opportunist and the diplomat, usually within a 6-month to 1-year time horizon. That's really not that long when you think about strategic planning being 3 to 5 years. They exercise control by perfecting knowledge, and they want to believe that he or she is superior to others by emphasizing more perfect hard data and logic. They take the my way or the highway approach to leadership, and is always sure that he or she is right because he or she is smarter and superior. And they like to make the decisions him or herself. Like I said, they tend to steer clear of the collaboration. There's no need to collaborate if you're the one who has all the answers, right? And they tend to take over projects without any discussion for which he or she shares responsibility with others. They depend less on others' judgment of quality and more on his or her own judgment as objective based upon his or her perceived mastery. Okay. They view collaboration and gaining multiple perspectives as an exercise. Okay, so they're giving you lip service, but a waste of time. And they oppose the group norm when it doesn't fit in his or her own preference or agenda. And they find it difficult to delegate or trust others to do the job well because only he or she can do it right. And they are unwilling to accept or use feedback from those he or she does not consider to be masters in an area of expertise considered important by him or her. And they are usually not a good team player because of his or her critical demand for perfection. It tends to lead to competitiveness and opposed to a mutuality of collaboration. So we're going to look at the expert and integrate it with those NCO general responsibilities. And first one, lead and develop subordinates and exercise effective followership in mission accomplishment. Yes, you should do this because the AFI states you must. Now, that seems like a very safe response, right? And we should do things in accordance with the AFI. But like I said earlier, if you think about our initiatives of spanning boundaries and growing beyond, what the AFI says or what team mandates, this can be highly delimiting to innovation and creativity. Okay, so you want to stay within the rules of the AFI, but remember the AFI just gives you a mandate. It's up to you to foster that creativity and innovative mindset at spanning those boundaries and optimizing. How are you going to meet those mandates in the AFI? Okay. But you will notice the AFI, the expert's going to reference that mandate with a very, very limiting way of getting there. This is another one. All I know, it's against the operating instruction, and that's enough for me. Okay, with the operating instruction, what that OI says. Well, maybe the OI is outdated. Maybe there's more questions that need to be asked here, right? Maybe the OI is delimiting in its approach, okay, and there's a better way of doing it. Maybe the OI hasn't caught up to technological advancements. Maybe the section or the author of the OI didn't experiment enough. So there's a lot of questions that still need to be asked than to shut your personnel down in fostering a little bit of innovation and asking questions. More inquiry needs to ensue, right? Okay, so we do see that although the OI may steer you in the right area, it can limit you. And here's another one. Increase personal and subordinate resilience by championing the social, physical, mental, and spiritual domains of comprehensive airman fitness and encouraging others to do the same. Apparently, they did not pay attention at the NCO Academy, or the reblowing would have given him or her the mental capacity for toughness, right? Unfortunately, you will hear this in your sections. There will be somebody who will correlate some kind of a weakness to somebody's resiliency and maybe say, like, let's say, and we're not just talking about resiliency as in suicide prevention. Let's talk about people who have other struggles, Let's say somebody has issues with I don't know, the fitness test, and instead of being encouraging and trying to get the individual to maybe exercise more, maybe invite them out for some exercise, and just kind of shrugging your shoulder and saying, well, they don't work out, so kind of it's almost like the old sucks to be them approach. You will see that with the expert. It's unfortunate, but the expert will say, this is the guidance, this is what the guidance says. You either meet it or you don't. Instead of really asking the airman or individual, whether it be an NCO, even a senior NCO, what their struggles are, and see if there's a way you can effectively address them. Here's another one. Actively lead and supervise subordinates. You must have the time and grade to be a good leader. You lack institutional knowledge and experience. Yeah, this one, the expert you will see will correlate how effective one is as a leader with how long they've been a leader. Okay, where they've been. Do they have their CCAF? If they filled their squares? Have they attended the NCO Academy? The one thing about these, the stages of adult development, as you will learn here with vertical leadership, and I invite you to do further research. I hope right now I'm introducing or planting a seed in you where, of a personal journey or a personal venture you're going to take on to grow yourself vertically as a leader. You're going to see that these mindsets, you'll sometimes find them in airmen. You're going to see them in the lower ranks. Stages of adult development go across the continuum. You'll see senior NCOs, senior ranking officers, even with earlier stages of action logics, earlier action logics. You will stumble across it. It's certainly a personal venture, and in order to transform and go through to the from the earlier action logics to the later action logic, number one, it takes quite a bit of time, but it takes a deliberate approach to development. And here's the next one: appropriately recognize and reward individuals whose military conduct and duty performance clearly exceeds established standards. She just received a medal 3 years ago. The guidance says she has to wait. Well, let's look at this. Number one, what kind of a decoration did this individual receive before? Okay, because if they've accomplished multiple things, they can receive, another achievement medal for different achievements. So it depends, like I said, it's just like the others, and especially with the expert, you're going to see this. Not enough inquiry is going into their decisions. Okay, they stop it there. They stop it with how they interpret the guidance, and they're the smartest person in the room, and it stops there. So maybe this individual, who they're referencing, received an achievement medal 3 years ago or 2 years ago, and now a combination medal is warranted. Maybe you can kind of consolidate numerous things that they've done and frame it in a higher level of leadership, and maybe this individual deserves a combination medal now. So it's a lot of times the guidance is being interpreted in a way where the expert will shut everybody down and not really foster deliberation on it, or collaboration where other people have something to say. So, like I said earlier, like the expert, the military culture fosters an achiever mindset. And being an achiever in our culture is actually a great place to be. Look at it, 30% in the corporate America, down there on the left corner. I'm just going to go back to the previous action logic just to take a look. Here we had 38% of the expert, which is a conventional action logic, and we're at 30% now for the achiever. So that's 68% of the population of corporate leaders. And look, that was a study that was administered. I know anybody can argue that, how did they get the data? But it was administered, and this is kind of like hypothesizing that there's this many that the percentages out there of achievers. But still, nonetheless, you're probably going to believe it when you look at the achiever, and how our culture fosters the achiever. Like the expert, the achiever will struggle when dealing with complexities due to the independent thinker mindset as opposed to being the interdependent collaborator. And because achievers work on optimizing their human capital and focus on best practices, they are highly effective. However, remember, best practices will only get you so far when dealing with an occurrence you have never seen before. They will only provide you a platform to work from. And the achiever, being conventional, may at times be less tolerant of those less driven, which can affect the social capital of the organization. And with attaining organizational goals being the achiever's main objective, the achiever will be less innovative than the post-conventional action logics, which we will cover next, because the achiever, like I said earlier, is the last of the conventional mindsets. So they are passionate about achieving goals, results. He or she likes to feel the power of being in control of his or her destiny. They are, like I said, the first action logic that recognizes the juggling of different time horizons, past, present, and future, not just as a bother, but rather as close to the essence of what leading really is. They work within longer time spans than the earlier three action logics, usually within a 1 year to 3 year time horizon, which will make the achiever a little bit better at the strategic planning than the expert. The 3 year time horizon will get you by. And they are able to focus not just on how things work within his or her sphere of influence, but how to be effective in one's broader context and helping the organization as a whole to be more effective. They begin to value different opinions and perspectives as useful data. And they are able to distinguish between ethics as an inner sense of right and wrong and manners, social conventions of what is right and wrong, but still unable to self-create his or her own ethical system. They are capable of designing entirely new methods and approaches to solving problems and streamlining processes within the obvious, simple, and complicated domains. And they have high performance standards and may be his or her own hardest critic. They pay attention to the differences between his or her own points of view and the points of view of others, and place value on teamwork and on agreements reached through consensus. They also seek values and welcome feedback, especially if it helps them or him or her to develop capability or achieve his or her goals. And the efforts to improve from feedback are only made in terms of his or her pre-established focus. Tell me only what I want to hear, and I'll accept it. And they begin to seek mutuality, not hierarchy in relationships with coworkers. So, you're moving away from the experts saying, you know what, and they kind of shut you down, and they say, I have the right answer. I'm not going to tell you how to do your job, but I kind of am type of people. So, like I said, they seek mutuality, not hierarchy in relationship with coworkers, and they are sensitive to and supportive in building and sustaining relationships. They're movers and takers. They're getting things done. They drive him or herself hard, and this often has a pace-setting impact of others in the organization. Problems are, like when you're working with an achiever or you have an achiever who works for you, it's kind of tough on others, especially if this person becomes your standard, clearly exceeds, and you start comparing performance based on what this individual setting the bar. It's kind of tough. It's tough on others, and then you'll start noticing a lot of people will start not liking their achiever counterparts very much. So it's something just to be aware of. So we're going to take a look at the achiever now. The first general responsibility: lead and develop subordinates and exercise effective followership and mission accomplishment. I want you to take this course because it spans beyond filling a square for your CCAF degree. It will develop you as an airman and make you a greater asset to the mission. Remember, the achiever is always looking at, the end state of mission accomplishment. Okay? Now, this could sound like when we cover redefining, like they're spanning away from just filling the square. But this really isn't your individualists, okay? They're not really, you're still being developed as an asset to the mission, okay? So you're achieving organizational goals here. You're not really developing the airman by recommending the course based on a whole person concept or a whole airman concept. Okay, so you're not really so much focused on the greater good. You're still focused on the mission here and treating the person as an asset or a tool. So that will be what distinguishes the achiever from, let's say, redefining or even transforming as we cover them. Increased knowledge and understanding of and mentor junior enlisted airmen on the institutional and occupational competencies required to accomplish the mission. And this is, everyone brings something of value to the table. I'll tackle that problem with a team concept. Remember, we're starting to be collaborators here, okay? We are starting to build and sustain relationships. You're not in that expert phase anymore where we're expert stage of development, where you're saying, well, I kind of have all the right answers, and I'll just waste my time asking somebody else. Next, responsibility. Demonstrate and facilitate a climate of effective followership by willingly owning, explaining, and promoting leaders' decisions. I know this will require longer hours and limited opportunities for leave. However, the mission really demands it at this point. So there, you're focused on the mission, you're focused on the end state. We have to achieve our organization's vision, okay, by accomplishing the mission. Actively lead and supervise subordinates. You've been demonstrating a greater degree of responsibility. I'm going to empower you to lead this project. I'll check in periodically to ensure everything is okay. Okay, so they're now starting to open themselves, like I said, away from the expert mindset and start trusting a little bit more and open up to collaboration. Now, the redefining action logic is the first of the post-conventional action logics. Notice the small percentage of leaders profiling as redefining, and this is a great concern. If you think about redefining is your first of the post-conventional mindsets, and what I've said along this lesson, as far as needing that post-conventional leader to have that multi-perspective view. We're only talking about 10% of the leaders, in corporate America would profile. Do you really think it's going to transition, or do you think it's really going to change much if we were to profile our military leadership? Especially when our culture cultivates that expert and achiever mindset. And like I said, you're still movers and shakers, being experts and achievers. You're still getting the job done. And a lot of times, too, that'll hinder the mindset that there needs to be further growth, further development. And if our professional military education isn't really drawing the connections or interweaving the depth with the breadth, nobody really knows this. These post-conventional mindsets exist. As experts, we think we optimized. As achievers, if I'm accomplishing the mission day in and day out, and I'm doing it with flying colors, why do I need to grow anymore? So think about that. So like I said, the redefining action logic is the first of the post-conventional action logics. And this action logic is in which this one is one in which you're recognizing the importance of being an interdependent collaborator as opposed to being an independent thinker. Okay, so you've transformed at this point away. You have a greater capacity to now move people. Okay, instead of taking it on yourself. And you have to think about what comes along with interdependent approaches to leadership. I've talked about cognitive diversity, okay? That's the differences of mindsets at play, okay? The differences people bring to the table with ideas, okay? Empowerment, which we know is a motivating variable or factor. Shared leadership, which we learn in PMA. And being transformational leaders, right? Which we've also learned in PMA, okay? The redefining mindsets focus on collaboration, makes him or her more effective in the complex environment or VUCA occurrences. And the out of the box thinking, accompanied with the collaborative mindset, makes the redefining action logic a cultivator of an innovative culture, right? So innovation seems to be a kind of a contemporary initiative for us, and I'm going to tell you it's a cultural thing. Innovation doesn't just come along with a $10,000 budget to spend and all of a sudden we're more creative. And innovation really is a mindset. Creativity is a personal attribute, but it doesn't mean you're innovative. Okay, there is a difference. Um, and that, being a cultivator of an innovative culture which will span the boundaries needed to deal with the unknown unknowns, that's what you need, right? Because in our line of business, being military, being Air Force, Air National Guard, accomplishing the kind of missions and the type of threats that we face, we see complexities, we see volatility, we see uncertainties, the complexities, the ambiguity of VUCA. We see it. We see it times 10. So being the first of the post-conventional action logics equips the redefining mindset with the capacity to deliberately and consciously transform their mindset to any of the earlier and even sometimes at times later when they're aware action logics. Okay, so the redefining can purposely and knowingly change and transform action logics to deal with the forces present. The redefining action logics can think with greater time horizons and yet possess the agility to implement strategic change in accelerated fashion. Okay, and they sometimes, and this is something to be aware of with the redefining. The multi-perspective view that the redefining possesses raises the awareness that he or she is different, and it's important to know they may grow to be frustrated with the conventional culture, the conventional mindset, working for somebody who has a conventional mindset. So these people do need a little bit of management, and good luck trying, because now you're dealing with a post-conventional action logic. So I do know in my research, I've come across 4 individuals who actually left their organizations because of their redefining mindset. Just being different. They're highly aware. They're aware of that they are post-conventional. They are aware of their differences. And many times when you are the post-conventional action logic in a conventional world or a conventional organization, you're going to have a lot of frustrations. So let's take a look here at some of these behaviors that are common. They have an increased ability to focus multi-perspectively. They see patterns and connections and resolves polarities and paradoxes. We're going to talk a little bit more about the polarities and paradoxes later. They tend to be more of an abstract thinker and operates unconventionally. It's unique and may even appear quirky. And they are attracted to difference, change, and complexity in people in the organization. And they appreciate others for their divergence, uniqueness, and self-expression. They enjoy an increasing sense of independence that can make the individualist look like a rebel or a maverick. And they become increasingly focused on the experiences of the moment and him or herself as an experimenter. So like I said, at this action logic, you're fostering more of an innovative mindset. And they are creative and a flexible thinker who relishes outside the box thinking and frees him or herself to some extent. That's extent, not extend, from the results focus of the achiever action logic. And they may increasingly seek and experiment with redefinition, instability, complexity, and ambiguity. They may even increasingly they may be reflective and questioning his or her own approaches and the approaches of others. They accept that this deep reflection may be mistaken for hesitancy or lack of drive, although it may also create a reputation for good judgment, good sound judgment. and foresight. And they experiment with using authority and power in different ways and in different contexts. They continue to shift towards connecting and mutuality in relationships and power. They remain aware of conventional social norms, but they do not feel overly constrained by them. And they become more of a facilitator of collaborative inquiry, and they begin to listen more and in different ways to help facilitate transformational change in others. So let's take a look at the redefining action logic. Now, the first of the responsibilities: increase personal and subordinate resilience by championing the social, physical, mental, and spiritual domains of comprehensive airman fitness and encouraging others to do the same, right? So you're going to notice the differences in mindsets because some of these are repeat responsibilities. I know Airman Jones has been struggling with some stressors from home. Although we argue a lot when we work together, I'm going to see if he wants to go for a run with me after work. Okay, so you're kind of going against your personal differences, and as a individualist, you're looking for the greater good here. Okay, you're looking for, that developing this relationship with Airman Jones in the future could mitigate the friction and conflict that would maybe be damaging during a complex occurrence. Next, develop innovative ways to improve processes, reduce costs, and improve efficiency, and provide suggestions up the chain of command that will directly contribute to the unit and mission success. Although it wasn't a success, I want to laud you for trying to integrate a little creativity in that process. Notice too, some of these common things we could hear from individuals we work with that correspond with the later stages of development. If you remember when I was covering the earlier ones, a lot of them seem to be negative in context, and a lot of what the later stages, a lot of things that would be framed or illustrated in a way of a post-conventional mindset would say, tend to be framed or tend to come out sounding positive, right? Right. So you would probably be more successful in accomplishing the mission and meeting these responsibilities as you start developing yourself into these later action logics or stages of development. In this one, appropriately recognize and reward individuals whose military conduct and duty performance clearly exceed established standards. Although our organization empowers senior leaders to write awards and decorations, I see they struggle. Therefore, I'm going to propose an idea for a nomination process for an award and decoration in which most of the writing is already accomplished for the supervisor. Okay, so we're adding effectiveness and efficiency to our process, but what we saw a polarity or a paradoxical issue with supervisors needing to meet mission mandates, but also, optimizing human capital and motivation through recognition programs, through awards, right? So there's a lot of challenges with those polarities that cause time management issues. Okay, so the post-conventional action logic has the ability of seeing polarities and not just problems, right? Because some people would look at the lack of a process being a problem, and then look at the deficiency in decorations and awards being a separate problem and not really connected to, okay? And they're highly connected, and they need to be managed, okay? You're not going to eliminate the problem unless you deal with the total root cause. And the root cause may be that the supervisors don't have time because they're meeting mission mandates, or maybe the supervisors have a death grip on the tactical level of leadership and haven't really spanned beyond to the operational and strategic level to work on optimizing motivation through awards and recognition programs. They have a death grip on the mission, and that's a polarity because they're also held accountable for those mission mandates. So they definitely want to be in the know, but for the redefining mindset, they're going to see that polarity and say, wait a second, the supervisor needs needs a little help on this. And me as a NCO, I am empowered to recognize others. But we have to get creative. See, in this particular one, instituting a nomination process could be innovative. So they're fostering innovation here. Now, next, guide, train, instruct, and develop subordinates so that they are technically ready to accomplish the mission, and ensure that they are prepared to accept increased levels of authority and responsibility. Although this is the way we've always accomplished this task, the guidance only provides us the desired outcome, not how it's accomplished. I'm going to engage in a little process improvement testing for effectiveness and efficiency measures, measure the results of my experiment, and present my idea for a rewrite. So here, and maybe another polarity was observed where you had a couple of forces at play. Number one, you have the mindset of this is the way we've always done it. This is the way you have that old culture, that old mindset. This is the way. And you have also maybe a procedure that needs a little bit of updating. Nobody's really caught it up with the times. So, through an empowerment and a shared leadership approach in the culture, this redefining mindset sees that we can fix the way things always have been done by maybe doing a little bit of testing for effectiveness, trying things, taking a little bit of risk and chances. You're not hurting anybody, you're not breaking any laws, you're not going against the mandates that are associated with the AFI. You're just going to try different ways of doing things, maybe adding a little bit of effectiveness and efficiency to it, and bringing it up to the times. Yes, very much the individualist approach might get a little pushback from those real old stringent cultures. Nonetheless, that mindset of going against the grain for the greater good is associated with the redefining and even transforming, as we'll see next. Now, although research has identified that only 4% of practicing leaders are of the transforming action logic, I want to shed light on a few things because this is an action logic or a stage of adult development we should all aspire to attain. First, the transforming action logic is endowed with a higher degree of multi-perspective thinking, which provides a greater capacity for paradoxical vision or the ability to see those polarities instead of problems. Okay, and I'm going to dive into a little bit more of what polarities are. I kind of gave you an overview for the redefining because at redefining you can see polarities. Polarities are ongoing, unavoidable, unsolvable, chronic issues that cannot be addressed through traditional problem-solving techniques. They usually are opposing forces, mostly positive and negative, that require management efforts in lieu of a method of eliminating the problem. Right? There is no way of eliminating the problem. You just have to manage it. And if you look at it through a narrow lens, the problem is you're going to think that you can eliminate the problem. You can't. It needs to be managed, and it means you're not seeing the whole polarity. I'm going to give you an example. The millennials and tech generation, your Zers, introduce different motivating factors to managers than the preceding generations. And they introduce an intelligence and tech-savvy dynamic to the workforce, right? Highly intelligent, very tech-savvy. However, they get bored easy. and they seek a sense of purpose. Therefore, they introduce changes to the attrition rate now and leave organizations on an average of what some researchers have reported to be an average of 6 to 8 years. That's what corporate America is seeing. I'm really curious to see now what the changes to the military retirement, what type of polarity that introduces with the attrition rates. Managing such a polarity would not be just changing the motivating factors. I know we keep hearing, we have to focus on what motivates millennials, what motivates these tech geners, in the hopes that we retain them. But, to truly manage this paradox or this polarity, we need to start fostering more agility in our training programs. Also, too, getting creative. Maybe, to deal with the high turnover rate we could be experiencing. Having agility, like having augmentee programs or more cross-functional training to eliminate single point failures. So that's the type of agility I'm talking about. Instead of solely focusing on retention, you need to kind of take it with a multifaceted approach, because some people you're not just going to retain. So what do? How do we foster that type of agility to take on people and get them trained quicker to deal with these attrition rates? So that would be an example of polarity management. Other noteworthy attributes associated with the transforming action logic is the 10 to 20-year time horizon. And that view makes the action logic more of a strategist than the previous. I mean, we're talking about people who can really, really see the future. Also, in my research, I have identified that the transforming action logic is where individuals exhibit a greater capacity to integrate a higher value system in decision making when faced with VUCA or a complex environment. And it is the transforming action logic where individuals optimize innovative thinking while working in a complex environmental context. And this action logic is exhibited by the true interdependent collaborators, ones who work towards the greater good, which usually spans beyond organizational strategic objectives. They're going beyond that. Like, what's great for the Air Force? What's great for the Air National Guard as a whole? What's great for mankind? And they can share and frame the vision and cultivate the talent needed to make the vision realized, that organizational vision. Let's look at some of these behaviors. They value one's need to grow and places the highest priority on the need to achieve self-actualization. They truly lead whatever their organizational rank or role. Like I said earlier, you may not be talking about senior NCOs here just because we're at a later stage of development. You're going to see this in NCOs. You might see them as airmen, airmen. They are able to see big picture with clear and relevant details. Is adept in creating shared visions. Leads with a paradoxical combination of fierce resolve and humility, and acting as a highly effective change agent or an agent for constructive change. And they are concerned with extended time periods, like I said, typically looks 10 to 20 years in the future. Consciously seeks and chooses new ways of framing opportunities, dilemmas, and conflicts with that accommodate the polarities and paradoxes of multiple points of view. Actually appreciates the tension of polarities and paradoxes. Usually looks at dilemmas as opportunities, like I said. Enjoys reframing the rules, where the rules are seen as unnecessarily limiting or restraining, unproductive, or stifling of creativity. Is increasingly attuned to the human development process, recognizing that others, as well as teams in the entire organization, that develop to the present as a result of past experiences, and they need continued opportunities to develop integrity, mutuality, and sustainability. They recognize the importance of ethical principles and mindset judgment for making defensible decisions, as integrity and the important value, personal value. He or she tends to choose what seems reasonable or just for many people in the long term rather than going for short-term gains. Welcomes evolving individuality in the context of mutual relationships. Is creative in conflict resolution, as he or she views conflict as an inevitable part of viable relationships. Remember earlier I talked about the constructive element in dynamic conflict in accordance with the Thomas model, and how the opportunist can be damaging, that diplomat can be damaging. You're not going to foster constructive conflict. And the transforming action logic is flexible about how tasks should be performed. Trust people to find their own solutions. And this is truly how you cultivate innovation. Is willing to let others make their own mistakes, but in the context of developing greater alertness, capacity, integrity. Again, innovation. Make mistakes. That safe to fail experiment. And can consciously adapt his or her leadership management style to meet the needs of diverse people and populations. As a result, he or she may come across people as having quite different personalities. I know you can't see the personalities down there at the bottom of the screen, but that is it. So now we're going to take a look at the transforming mindset. Our first responsibility: lead and develop subordinates and exercise effective followership in mission accomplishment. The polarity between developing myself as an airman and improving myself as a technician is causing me to get better with time management. Remember, and this is in your Air Force Handbook 362618, we are airmen first, specialists second. Do not just concentrate on the technical side of your job. You could be a great airman, which will transition to you being an effective technician. But you cannot just concentrate solely on being a good technician and expect to be a good airman. And one of them is going to help foster more excellence, integration of core values in your decision making. Most of the ethical decision making. It's what one transitions to the other, but the other, it's not reversible or interchangeable, I should say. Increase knowledge and understanding of and mentor junior enlisted airmen on the institutional and occupational competencies required to accomplish the mission. I am a creator, and Staff Sergeant Smith is a refiner. I think we're getting into the four lenses here. It's not a psychometric measuring, but it's more of a personality measurement. So I'm a creator, and Staff Sergeant Smith is a refiner. I'm going to partner with her on this project to fill certain voids we may have. Okay, so you recognize that not only are there personal deficiencies that could impede optimization as a team, but there could be someone, Staff Sergeant Smith's end, and that maybe putting the two of you together, you're going to optimize performance. This next one: increase personal and subordinate resilience by championing the social, physical, mental, and spiritual domains of comprehensive airman fitness and encouraging others to do the same. The polarity associated with cross-functional demands is causing conflict. Everyone has their own mission mandates, and sometimes people don't have time for others. I'm going to create a working group that will foster the information sharing, cultivating some empathy for one another, with the hopes that we have the same sense of urgency for others' obligations. Okay, so we have a greater view than just on our shop, right? Which I think we covered when we went through examples of the opportunist action logic. So now we're looking for the greater good of the organization. Okay, understanding that there could be a polarity of one shop or one section on base having a mandate, and that mandate may put stressors on somebody else's mandate. Okay, it could be a piece of equipment. Um, you know, for example, avionics sometimes has to key the command post radios. So the command post has to have empathy that, that requires the management of a ComSec account. So, and this example can be used across base. Okay, everybody has mandates, and you have to understand and be empathetic that your mandates sometimes will affect other sections on base, which puts stressors, puts mandates on them that have to be measured, and people are rated based on them. So having that organizational wide view, you're going to see with a transforming mindset. Develop innovative ways to improve processes, reduce costs, and improve efficiency, and provide suggestions up the chain of command that will directly contribute to unit and mission success. Innovation funds are nice to have. However, innovation is a mindset. Creativity is an attribute. Fostering an inclusive environment where cognitive diversity is valued will result in an innovative culture. That's right. That's right. Let's concentrate on diversity. Let's concentrate on the mindset. Let's concentrate on empowerment so airmen can kind of submit their ideas without fear that they have to worry about it getting shut down somewhere along the chain of command because of personal differences. Okay? And innovation funds and spending money does not mean you're being innovative. That is a facilitator of innovation ideas, innovative ideas, innovation plans, innovation strategies. It's a facilitator. But your innovation is a cultural mindset, being a learning organization, being innovative. Culture. That's a culture. Okay, so fostering the culture, you're going to see more of that in the transforming action logic. I won't touch much on the alchemists because these are your social movement people such as Martin Luther King, Gandhi, your Nelson Mandelas. Although these are some prominent names in leadership, they make 1% of the population of leaders and are so far outside the box they have a hard time staying inside the box when it's time to transform to accomplishing organizational goals. Not saying that they can't. I'm just saying that our organization tends to struggle with this. And plus, many of you may not profile an alchemical. I'm not saying you wouldn't. The focus on a worldly view and the greater good spans so far outside the organization. It's really, really tough to reel it in for the purposes of what I'm going over tonight or today with the general Nco Responsibilities. So, how do these action logics come into play when we're engaged in leadership and even followership at times? When we act based on our meaning making, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, we engage in a process called action and inquiry. It's going to be more deliberate though, it's going to be more consciously. And here we are faced with an occurrence. As you see, the illustration to the left, there's your VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. We're faced with that occurrence, and then we engage in reflective thinking. Have I seen this before? Have I been involved in an occurrence like this before? And then we engage in our reflective inquiry. And this is where we start saying, what if? What if I did this? What if I took action? And then we take action, okay? And that action is shaped by our action logic within that movement. And this illustration depicts the action inquiry process and all of its moving parts. So again, you're faced with the VUCA. Notice to the left, your conventional leader, you have one lens that you're looking through. Your post-conventional leader has all 7. So in your mind, you are shaping what action logic. If you're post-conventional, you're choosing. The conventional, you're relying on your prominent. Action logic you're going to use in the moment. Okay? Then that's your vertical leadership. Down there at the bottom, your habits, your mindsets, your capacities, that's your vertical development. That's based on whether or not you're acting in accordance with opportunist, diplomat, expert, achiever, redefining, transforming, or alchemical. And it's impacting your horizontal leadership that I mentioned earlier. That's your knowledge, your skills, your competencies, all the framework you got in PME. The unfreezing, implementing change, the refreezing, the Thomas model. It's you're using your tools, but how you use your tools, the capacity of your tools, has to deal with that vertical leadership, which derives from your mindset, okay, your capacities. And the quote here from Fisher, Rook, and Torbert in their book, Personal and Organizational Transformations Through Action Inquiry, the weaving of action and inquiry prompts an awareness of the action logic the leader has integrated, providing an awareness of his or her capacities, resulting in enhancing personal and organizational effectiveness. So, now that you have learned about action logics and how they shape our behavior, you may be asking yourself, well, Chief Perkins said adding more tools to my toolbox is not really considered development or growth, just becoming more knowledgeable. But how do I grow or develop as a leader? How do I change my mindset to one of a later action logic or stage of development? And how do I become post-conventional and increase my capacity to lead? Who out there has heard of mindfulness as a general practice, or even mindful leadership as a form of leadership development? Mindfulness or mindful leadership. It's actually growing in popularity. A lot of people interconnect it with meditation, being in the moment, unplugging yourself and analyzing where's your mind at the moment, developing yourself through deliberate, holistic analysis of yourself, taking deep breaths and looking back and being reflective of your actions. And could you do better? Could you have done it different? Well, Bill Torbert and David Rook, they took it a step further in their framework. And they identified a process much like mindfulness, but with a more deliberate focus on intentionality and strategies in our actions. And this process is called developmental action inquiry. It's much like mindfulness, but it's very deliberate in what we've gone through already or gone over in our with the action logics. It is essentially taking a look at yourself in the first, second, and third person in that mindful approach. I have found in my research, which has been logically validated by David Rook, in fact, that journaling, reflective journaling, is an excellent developmental tool when it comes down to developmental action inquiry. If you're not one for meditation, you may want to try journaling. And if you're not one for journaling, you just need to slow yourself down and be in the moment. Think about an incident or an occurrence and ask yourselves a series of questions, much like the questions here on the slide. What you are looking for are the connection, the interconnection of those attributes and behaviors that I covered in those action logics. Think back. What did I tell you? The opportunist exhibiting, as far as behavior. What about the expert, right? What about that diplomat? And depict whether or not your habits, mindsets, and capacities fostered the desired outcome. Not just based on your desires, but the organizations and even the key stakeholders. Were you effective in your actions? To even go further in your development, and if you have a position that doesn't introduce enough complexities on a day-to-day basis, or when you engage reflection or journaling, to elicit a higher leadership capacity within a competency, you can incorporate scenarios as you're doing this, as you're being mindful, as you engage in your what ifs, as you carry out second and third person feedback. The integration of the later action logics or post-conventional thinking in your what ifs inquiry will foster development to the later action logic integration with, faced with an incident or a scenario of similar variables, and foster greater intentionality with mindfulness in action. Developmental action inquiry heightens that sense of awareness of one's capacity to lead, strategies, and skill set required to complete a task. It guides a leader to the axis where vertical and horizontal leadership meet. Fostering this type of inquiry requires a first, second, and third person view of oneself. The first person feedback, that is, what personal gaps do you have? Your inquiry spans across your personal actions and behaviors. The second person feedback involves probing questions such as, if skillfully carried out, will the plans or strategies be successful? So here, as you see, you're slowing yourself down. And that third person feedback involves analyzing your intentions and purposes. Questions such as, given what happened, that's the outcome. How do the intentions and behaviors now look? So you look back at your intentionality, look back at those strategies, look back at what happened, and then think back at those behaviors that I gave you. What mindset were you in? Could you have been at a later stage of development? Would the behaviors associated with the later stage of development help you in your decision? Would you have had a better outcome? Would a purposeful transformation to an earlier stage of development help foster more success? This is your first, second, and third person feedback. Your I, your we, your they. Now, when one engages in action inquiry, they travel through what Fisher and Rook and Torber call the 4 territories of experience, and that your first territory is your intentionality. It encompasses examining one's purpose, aims, intuition, attention, and vision. The second territory is your planning, and that encompasses your strategies, your schemes, your ploys, and game plans. The third territory is your action. It includes your behavior, your skills, your patterns of activity, your deeds, and your performance. And the fourth and final territory, being outcomes, involves the assessments, the results, the events, the observed behavioral consequences, and the environmental effects. Okay? So when you're journaling, when you're asking yourself, when you're acquiring, when you're being mindful, these are your 4 territories that you want to go across when you think about how effective were you in the incident or the occurrence. So the dynamic of progression of inquiry across all 4 territories of experience is the core of developmental action inquiry. And with this, one can can have a better understanding of him or herself. One can improve his or her quality of goals. One should improve his or her overall effectiveness, and one should be able to deal with the complexities. So as I've said throughout this lesson, I've engaged in extensive research on vertical development. My research has led me to identify 10 critical principles to be mindful of when cultivating vertical development. So these are Chief Perkins's 10 critical principles to be mindful of when cultivating vertical development. The first one, frustration is a necessary evil. Think about a time where you were frustrated because you had a personal deficiency when tackling a problem, or things just didn't go your way. You can either ignore the feeling or it become what theorists have referred to as a trigger for the need for growth. Remember what the person first-person inquiry involved in developmental action inquiry. You are assessing your personal gaps. Making such an assessment should foster you to educate yourself and fill the void, or even pull out the behaviors associated with those action logics and identify what would make you more effective in a given situation. Now, remember what I said earlier? I want to preface that, when you pull out these behaviors and, it fosters a different action than maybe you would have initially taken, it takes a long time to transform from one action logic to another. Now what I'm doing is just giving you tools, techniques, making you aware, conscientious, trying to foster behavior that's corresponding with later stages of development to truly move through the stages. It could take years, even with a deliberate approach. Next one of my principles is the feeling of frustration may lead to disruption, and disruption fosters development. And that feeling of frustration leading to disruption or a certain occurrence will foster the disruption needed to grow. Earlier stages of development may ignore this disruption. A lot of times people of the earlier action logics will shrug their shoulders off, say tomorrow's a new day, never really truly allow it to transform to being a learning experience, or even to pull it out again when they engage in the what ifs of reflective inquiry. However, later stages will always pay attention to them and use them for a future action inquiry. Being deficient in making a leadership decision or an undesired outcome, or even a butt chewing. You get your butt chewed out by a supervisor, you get counseled, they all can be disruptors. It's how you frame them. It's how you transition them to being learning experiences and use them to foster growth. Now, there are numerous learning theories that could be tied into vertical development. My framework connected two, and the first being Bloom's taxonomy. Some of you who have studied education or even went to the Air National Guard's instructor certification course probably have seen these two theories before. Bloom's is essentially based on how people learn. And you think about your promotion boards, how do you go from 12 points to 16 points, right? For any of you who've recently gone through a board, think about that. How did you go from 12 to 16 points? You can provide a solid textbook answer, illustrating an in-depth comprehension of the material and achieve the 12 points. But to optimize and get full points, you had to provide an example, right? So when you provide an example of theory implementation, you're illustrating a higher level of learning, moving to, as you see to the upper left, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. So you're going through the cognitive domain, and you're moving to the higher levels just by providing that example. So you're being illustrative that you didn't just like digest reading the night before your promotion board and come in with newfound knowledge, which is down there at the bottom. You actually are synthesizing and applying. Now, you should also notice that at times you illustrated a higher capacity when meeting a competency. There was somewhat of an interconnection with Bloom's cognitive domain up there with synthesis and evaluation. So, just that, whenever you've been illustrative of a high-level synthesis and application, usually you met your competency with greater capacity. Now, I want you to think back when you've attended a professional development or professional military education in the past. What theories did you hold on to years later for implementation when you were met with certain forces? What did you remember? Why did you remember certain facets of that training and not others? And it's because you place value on the material. And valuing can also serve as a disruptor for growth. Nevertheless, placing value moves you from the cognitive domain to Bloom's affective domain, wherein feelings are engaged on the material learning. Individuals at a later stage or post-conventional development will place more value on learning material and will close the gaps identified in reflective thinking and reflective inquiry through the 4 territories of experience. Furthermore, through research, I've identified that the post-conventional action logics were in a constant state of development, thereby placing value on material if it could expand their leadership competencies. There was a lot of value taking them from that cognitive domain to the affective domain. Now, placing value in accordance with Bloom's framework transitions to Malcolm Knowles' framework of andragogy, which is how adults learn, the foundation of adult learning, which you'll see to the right. It's illustrated to the right, top right. Allowing yourself to be disrupted and embracing those triggers for vertical development will provide a robust need to know, right? You see the need to know in the upper left of that framework. Individuals seeking vertical development will exemplify most of the motivating factors seen here, which will enhance learning. Increasing your learning will in turn foster vertical growth by increasing learning capacity as your motivation, your need to know, and your self-concept cultivate a greater learning capacity. Now, what have you learned from your Air Force career thus far is that you will have no shortage of horizontal leadership training. You will learn continuous process improvement. You will learn change management. You will learn conflict resolution and various facets thereof. You're going to have different frameworks of how to improve your leadership style. However, some people will attend these courses, or some people will attend the same course involving strategic planning, for example, with half the individuals seeing only the forest and the other half only seeing the trees. Why is that? And it's because we're not all engaging horizontal development at the same stage of vertical development. We're not all looking with a multi-perspective lens. And it is up to you to shape yourself, to have that multi-perspective view of the post-conventional action logic and have the capacity to change lenses to see the trees and the forest. One of the participants in my research happened to be a leading researcher in vertical leadership from the Center for Creative Leadership. Put it best when describing the post-conventional mindset in a conventional world by stating, it's like playing 3-dimensional chess when everyone else is playing 2-dimensional chess. Now, you think about that statement and the capacity the post-conventional has in exercising fluidity of transformation to different action logics when certain forces present themselves. You're not going to experience a shift in capacity from a training course of professional development. Therefore, in accordance with what you just learned from the previous slide, it is going to be up to you. It's going to be up to you to take the material taught in your horizontal leadership training and frame it with a multi-perspective lens and applying the appropriate mindset when implementing the theory-based approach. Now, throughout my vertical leadership development, mostly around peer leaders and classmates who are learning vertical leadership, people who are new to the concept frame vertical implementation as a shift that you go through from horizontal to vertical to meet certain forces present. Like, oh, wait, I need to stop this occurrence, and now I have to move vertically. Well, that's not the case. Oftentimes, due to turbulence of an occurrence, you won't be able to slow the situation down to make such a shift anyway. Every leadership competency you meet in your daily responsibilities has some degree of depth representative of your capacity within that competency. And this is the bridge that I talked about earlier between breadth and depth. And whether consciously or subconsciously, your actions are shaped by a form of inquiry, which in turn is shaped by your stage of development. Now, sometimes during times of stress or dealing with complexities, your knee-jerk reactions can be shaped by what Torber refers to as a fallback action logic that we have. Now, remember the famous quote Mike Tyson has been credited with. If some of you remember this, it's actually comical, but it is very true when dealing with complexities and dealing with mindsets and fallback action logic. And that is, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And think about, the military missions. Think about the missions that we deal with day in and day out. Think about your plans and how many times you had to be dynamic as a leader and change those plans with some agility because you were essentially just punched in the face with change. So very applicable. And you got to remember, vertical and horizontal leadership are always connected. That's a principle. Also, action logic awareness bolsters abilities. Okay. A higher magnitude of action logic awareness has been found in the post-conventional action logics. And having this awareness facilitates knowing your capacities to implement competencies, as well as knowing how to frame, illustrate, and advocate to your audience based on the awareness of action logics involved. So, for example, you engage in conflict resolution, having the action logic awareness, not only your own, but the ones involved, will foster a more effective implementation of your Thomas model to conflict resolution and probably a better outcome. And the post-conventional mindset transcends optimization. And having the ability to exercise the fluidity of transformation I talked about, that ability that post-conventional has to take on the behaviors and attributes and mindsets of each of the action logics, allows them to be appropriate in their actions. The appropriate mindset to deal with the forces in a situation or occurrence will foster optimization of the horizontal skill set, no matter what the framework, whether it's change management, whether it's conflict resolution, it's giving you that advantage. Nevertheless, that, again, like I said earlier, the fluidity of transformation of different action logics is associated with the post-conventional action logic, which necessitates your need to grow. This is why dealing with the complexities we have to deal with day in and day out necessitates why you need to grow and develop into a post-conventional mindset. This is a good one here. Fluidity of transformation to an earlier action logic is necessary. And I really want to stress this one. Fluidity of transformation to an earlier action logic is necessary, and it's never to be viewed as dumbing yourself down. You're not dumbing yourself down. Remember, the stages of adult development are not hierarchical or a ranking of intelligence. I bet when I went through all those common behaviors associated with each action logic, we all could identify times in which we exhibited or cultivated behaviors associated with all the action logics, including those earlier stages. Just own up to it. Let's not be embarrassed. It happens, right? However, we have a prominent action logic, and it requires a psychometric assessment tool to identify what that prominent action logic is. I can't do that for you. My intent here is to foster vertical development by you having an awareness of the behaviors associated with each action logic. Most of you can look at that and kind of assess yourselves and aspire to grow and develop to those post-conventional action logics. Be very aware of all the action logics that are associated and their associated behaviors. Maybe you may want to say, I do this often. You know, sometimes, and then you see it's of a opportunist mindset, and you say, wow, I really don't want to do that anymore. Well, there you go. Now, through reflection, through reflective practices, now you can integrate shaping it, changing, and maybe seeing with those action logics, well, how does the redefining usually do this? Since I know that that's the action logic, you know, that where optimization comes into play of those horizontal facets of leadership. Now, my research found that knowing the behaviors associated with each action logic, as I just shared with you, may help during developmental action inquiry, or to check yourself during times in which a knee-jerk reaction could be damaging. Again, there will be times in which an earlier action logic is needed to deal with the forces present, and there will be times where transformation to the opportunist will result in striking while the iron's hot. As long as the fluidity of transformation back to the later stage is integrated for acting in accordance with your core values. And the expert in you is needed when you're researching guidance. Remember I said, you know, it's okay. We need to research guidance sometimes. However, the achiever in you is keeping that steady course to having the mission, vision, and focus areas realized. And however, I'm going to charge you all to transcend yourselves to cultivating a post-conventional mindset and transition from an independent thinker to an interdependent collaborator. And for those of you who attended the Leadership Foundries training, the LCP1 and LCP2 course, you know, you were taught the DISC assessment. You were taught Myers-Briggs and other personality assessment. This is just to illustrate this for you. It will be the expert in you to know how to apply the team building and personality techniques when team building or staffing individuals to tackle problems. However, the post-conventional mindset will foster the culture in which subordinates understand these differences and posture themselves in a position to be effective. So you're doing it on the culture. You're changing the culture. You're fostering the culture. The post-conventional leader is a transformational leader and cultivates a collaborative environment through shared leadership and empowerment. My next principle, cultures can breed or limit mindsets, and this couldn't be more true. The military does a pretty good job. They do a solid job of cultivating a learning culture. However, the mechanistic principles of culture will always, like I said earlier, foster an expert to achiever mindset, which isn't a bad thing if you're in a simple or complicated domain. It's during the complex or chaotic domains that the expert and achiever mindsets will delimit the approaches, providing a cushion of dealing with the VUCA. Something that will soften the blow by 70 to 75% if we're successful, if we're lucky. Checklist, standard operating procedures, and technical orders will not span the boundaries enough to provide the agility for accelerating change, innovative measures, or optimization of horizontal tools during turbulent times. My research found that the redefining action logic is actually where a leader was able to optimize certain leadership competencies in areas such as strategic planning, change management, ethical decision making, and fostering an innovative culture while working in a VUCA environmental context. So our organization, now think about this. I want you to think about this. Our organization cultivates an expert to an achiever mindset, right? But our environmental context demands the very next stage of development to optimize knowledge, skills, and competencies. What does that tell you? What is wrong with that picture? Not much on the organizational side, because we are mechanistic, we're military. There's a reason why we have a very stringent infrastructure to make sure things are done right. And like I said, that'll give you about 70 to 75% success when transitioning from maybe a complicated domain to a complex domain. But, you know, maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe you'll fail. That's why it's up to us as leaders to cultivate a collaborative culture, one where all mindsets are at play. You know, one where we're spanning boundaries. You know, we're being redefining. You know, we're not delimiting ourselves, and we're not just going to the guidance constantly. We're saying, wait a second. You know, maybe we can change something here. Maybe somehow we can cultivate a little innovation to make that change. Next principle, the complex environment demands a post-conventional mindset. Okay, the complex environment demands a post-conventional mindset. So I've talked about our environmental context more than once throughout this lesson, and I'm going to introduce the Cynefin framework developed by Dan Snowden. And I want you to recognize some of the different domains that we find ourselves in. And as I stated in the previous slide, in an organization that fosters the expert or achiever mindset, we will be fine in that obvious or complicated domains. You know, we're there a lot, and we're fine. The expert or achiever is fine. However, remaining in that conventional mindset will limit the meaning making to analyze cause and effect for the most effective response. Okay, so to put this in perspective, you know, Snowden categorizes the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 in the chaotic, that chaos domain that you see down there in the lower left. And think about how we've come a long way since then. Okay, so you have a lot of collaboration, you had some innovation, and you had a lot of maybe post-conventional mindsets that now have moved what could be a similar occurrence to the complex or even complicated domain, because we have an infrastructure now to deal with that. Okay, but it took maybe post-conventional mindsets at that strategic leadership planning level to foster enough innovation and collaboration to develop that infrastructure and those strategies to deal with it. Instead of just saying, well, that was a bad occurrence, I hope it doesn't happen again. You know, now I want you to think about some of the earlier action logics and how their behaviors can be limiting or damaging during complex time. You know, being an expert is great when you're dealing with known knowns, okay, when you're dealing with a known environment. But the inability to transform to meet the forces present can introduce grave issues. Now, the post-conventional mindset will foster enough of a collaborative culture to have the moving parts already empowered to move during these times of complexities, or even in the chaotic domain. As I stated earlier, the redefining action logic will foster optimization of our horizontal skill set during complex times. That's that complex environment. And with redefining, you have transitioned from the independent thinker to, as an expert, to an interdependent collaborator, cultivating talent by optimizing both human and social capital to span beyond accomplishing the mission. Also, another finding in my research was that there was a greater degree of ethical decision-making and innovation observed by the transforming action logic during complex times. And with transforming being the later stage in post-conventional continuum, it is important to know that as you develop, because during complex times, the standard operating procedures or technical orders may not be easily accessible due to the time being of the essence. So you have to think on your feet, you have to act on your feet, which reinforces that, you know, you have to develop yourself to be ethical during the obvious and complicated times. You know, you have to be of a post-conventional action logic, where in order to be an ethical leader or an ethical thinker, an ethical doer, that you're not, in need of some form of guidance to help get you there. And that big takeaway is to develop during the simple or obvious times. Build those relationships to sustain during complexities and allow the complexities to be the disruptors needed for growth. But it is Snowden's framework that reinforces the need for the vertical development. And it's a framework we really, really need to pay attention to because, being a military organization, we find ourselves here. We find ourselves in that obvious, complicated, complex, and chaotic domains. And even disorder, which you see in the center, has, certain traits of all. So, as you see, there is a problem of practice in leadership development, and we went over it, and that's that leaders, as we learn, leadership development, the problem of practice is that it doesn't truly foster development, and it fosters horizontal growth. It's giving you the tools. It's not improving your capacity within a competency. Vertical development interconnects with the stages of adult development known as action logics. Action logics are associated with the way we make meaning of occurrences. Using Torbert's framework, there are 7 action logics, what Torbert refers to as the 7 transformations of leadership. You get a chance, as you'll see in my references, I kind of refer to this article, Harvard Business Review article, the 7 transformations of leadership. Highly recommend it. Google it, it'll come up and you can read it. And, your first is your opportunist, pre-conventional. First of your conventional, your diplomat, your expert, your achiever, and the redefining, which I left up here. It's what we really aspire. I mean, it'd be nice to aspire to the transforming action logic, but like I said, these action logics really, really, they take time. They take time to develop. It's not an overnight thing. It's certainly not like PME, like the horizontal leadership, where it's like you walk away with a certain level of learning. This takes time. These are stages of adult development we're dealing with. The redefining, I ask you to strive for that. That's really where you're optimizing all of your horizontal skill set. And you're also able to optimize in a complex environment. And you're transforming. Remember, you're transforming. You're doing everything a little bit better than with a greater capacity than you did in redefining. But what was noteworthy about transforming was the greater degree of core value integration in decision making and innovation, a higher degree of innovative thinking, even during complexities. And then you have your alchemical. Those are your Nelson Mandela's, people who move more social change. I'm talking about really, really spanning outside our constraints there. And remember that development to action logics can be facilitated by developmental action inquiry. It's a personal venture. You're going to have to be mindful about it. Engage in some mindfulness with an integration of first, second, and third person reflection. Here's your first, second, and third person inquiry, and across the 4 territories of experience. And to continue our summary, remember there are 10 critical, these are Chief Perkins' 10 critical themes to keep in mind when cultivating vertical development. Frustration is a necessary evil. Embrace it. It's your friend. Same thing with disruption. Disruption will foster development. It should get you to analyze your deficiencies, maybe even your organizational deficiencies. Learning is a catalyst for vertical development. Remember, I went through not just an understanding of the material, but how you synthesize and apply the material and the value placed on it, and the andragogical approach of being motivated. What motivates you? Why do you have the need to know? Vertical development is a personal adventure. You're not going to get this in EPME. EPME is going to give you the horizontal facets of leadership. It's going to give you the frameworks. It's going to give you the theories to use, the steps. Your capacity within those competencies is up to you. Vertical and horizontal leadership are always connected. Absolutely. Anytime you engage in implementation of a theory you learn in PMA, there's a mindset involved. There's a capacity in how well you're doing it. And action logic awareness bolsters abilities. Post-conventional mindsets transcends optimization. Remember, the post-conventional, you're able to optimize by utilizing all the mindsets that are involved. Having the ability to exercise fluidity of transformation, to different mindsets, to engage in conflict resolution or get buy-in for organizational change. How do you transform somebody into a change agent? Fluidity of transformation into an earlier action logic is necessary. Remember, just because you may have to be an opportunist or you've identified yourself as an opportunist when engaged in reflective inquiry, may not be a bad thing considering that the situation called for it. Cultures can breed or limit mindsets. Absolutely. If I've done anything in this lesson, I hope I've cultivated or I planted a seed for you to understand that it's up to you to change the culture and to help one another optimize your capacity within your competencies to foster vertical growth, foster vertical development. And the complex environment demands the post-conventional mindsets. Remember Snowden's Cynefin framework. You can look up a lot of articles on that. There's a lot of journals, academic journals, scholarly journals that go over the framework. It really, really helps when you look at it in your perspective of breaking down the domains we operate in. And that is it. And if you have any questions, you know where to find me. Chief Master Sergeant Bill Perkins. I'll be glad to mentor anybody in vertical leadership. Continue this. Help you with a little bit of coaching. Answer questions like I just said. If you have questions about this lesson, please feel free. And these are the references that were used. So I thank you again. And that's the end of this lesson.